Hello learners, welcome to this course on preparation of research proposal in social sciences. I am Dr. Pratik Chaurasia, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Education, Banaras Hindu University. Today we are going to discuss our module number 7 and lecture 31st, which is based on identification and selection of a sample. As you all know, in the previous lectures we have discussed about the various aspects of population, sample, how to adopt some certain sample technique, but today we are going to discuss a very important topic, that how you will actually identify and select the sample for your study. So let us discuss key learning themes for today's lecture. Introduction to sample selection, why sample selection matters, recap of key terms, steps in identifying the sample, factors influencing sample selection, qualitative versus quantitative sampling needs, examples from educational research, and common pitfalls to avoid. So let us start and discuss all this one by one. First of all, we will discuss introduction to sample selection. You can see here on the screen that sampling is the process of identifying and selecting a subset from a population for research. Proper sample selection enhances the validity, reliability, and generalizability of findings. It is critical for both qualitative and quantitative research. It is important for a researcher to understand that sampling is a process of identifying and selecting a subset from a population for research. We have discussed that how you select some particular sample from a specific population, as well as it is very important to understand that proper sample selection enhances the validity, reliability, and generalizability of findings. And sampling is important and critical for both kind of research, whether it is qualitative, quantitative, or you can say whether it's a mixed kind of a research. Why sample selection matters? Here it is very important that why you have to select some certain sample and why that sample matters for your research. First is, it reduces cost, time, and resource. Very important. The moment you make judgment for your selection of sample, you are inclining the things with related to your research objective, and as well as what kind of hypothesis you have designed. Therefore, it is very important that what kind of a sample you are selecting, because it is very important in terms of reducing cost, time, and resources, because actually when you select a sample from a population, you select a small proportionate which is true representation of the population, and then ultimately you will require less cost, time, and resources in order to handle the sample and ultimately make generalization for the population. It helps to focus on a manageable group that reflects the larger population. It is very important and significant that whatever sample you select, it reflects the larger population. Only thing is that whatever sample you have selected, it should be true representative of the population. What is the characteristics of the population? All that characteristics of the population should be truly represented by the sample. It ensures ethical feasibility and data manageability. It ensures that how you ethically manage the things, and how data whatever you obtain with the sample will be dealt by you. Recap of some key terms. Population, we have discussed already the entire group of interest which a researcher is eyeing that. A sample, subset of the population. And sampling frame, a list or method used to define who is included in the sample. This all three things work together, and on the basis of these three things we define population, and out of that we select sample with the help of our sampling frame. So these three things are very important. Keep in mind whenever you are identifying your sample for your research. Whenever you are identifying your sample for a research and making an attempt to define your sample, please be attentive in terms of remembering and defining these three terms: population, sample, and sampling frame. Let us take one example here. An analysis of schools teacher perceptions of the National Education Policy NEP 2020 in Uttar Pradesh. You can see simple thing, that a simple research topic we have taken, and how you will define population, how you will consider sample out of it, and what will be your sampling frame. Population, all school teachers in any state. Sample, 500 teachers across any 5 districts of a state. Sampling frame, government database of teacher. Here you can see in example we are claiming that we need to do analysis of a school's teacher, those who are in Uttar Pradesh. But if you consider any study that analysis of a school teacher perception towards NEP 2020 in any state or any area, then your population will be all school teacher in that state, all school teachers in that particular state or area, whatever you are taking. Then come to the sample. Sample will be 500 teachers across any 5 district of a state, and here please take into the consideration that whatever sample you will select in terms of sample size, also use the different things that I have already discussed with you, that how to select the sample size, make use of that, and then select appropriate sample size. And last is sampling frame, government database of teachers. So whenever you select your sample and define your sampling frame, do it like this. Steps in identifying the sample, very important for a researcher, those who are in a process to identify and define their sample for research. First is understand and define your population clearly. Set inclusion and exclusion criteria. Choose an appropriate sampling technique, probability or non-probability as per the requirement of the study. Fourth is accessibility as well as willingness to participate. And fifth is determine the appropriate sample size based on research design and statistical measure. So here if you can see the screen, these 5 different steps combined together and help you in identifying your particular sample. Let us discuss this one by one. First is understand and define your population clearly. It means whatever population you have selected, you have to understand your population appropriately, and on the basis of that you have to define it also, that you are going to define and understand your population in such a manner so that you can have clear understanding of what kind of sample you are going to select from the population. Second is very important, because when you do sampling, when you select some certain sample, then definitely you include something and you exclude something. Then it comes a question into the mind of a researcher, that how to include, how to exclude, what is to be selected, what is to be rejected. Then set inclusion and exclusion criteria, and different kinds of sampling techniques are going to help you, that how you are going to do this. Third is choose appropriate sampling technique, the most important phase of defining your sample. Select the appropriate sampling technique, whether it is probability, whether it is non-probability, and it depends upon the requirement of the study. Depends upon the requirement of the study. And here you can make a small note that when you are looking towards your sampling technique, look at towards your objective of the research, because your objective says everything, that what you are going to do and what you are going to achieve. So when you are consulting your objective again and again, it will give you a help that what kind of probability you are, what are kind of sampling you are going to do, whether it is probability or non-probability sampling. Next is accessibility as well as willingness to participate. This is very important. When as a researcher you are going to select some certain sample, it is not necessary that the target to whom you want to select for a sample, they will give you data. It is not necessary. Sometimes you may feel that you can get data from certain group, but they are not willing to answer you, they are not willing to participate in your research. So as a researcher, become very practical and look into the willingness and accessibility of your participants, that whether the sample you are defining and selecting for your study are going to become member of your research or not. If you are doing this, then it comes under the ethical considerations also, that you are looking toward these all aspects. Next is determining the appropriate sample size based on research design and statistical measure. This is another very interesting and very important aspect of defining the sample, that you have chosen good sampling technique, you have understand the accessibility and willingness also of the sample, but how much sample size you will select. So determine it appropriately with the help of different research design, statistical measures, and you can also take help of various review of literature done on similar kind of a research. It will provide you a help that on the basis of that you can select and define your sample size. Factors influencing sample selection. So let us discuss this also. There are some certain factors which affects the sample selection. You can see here, first is nature of the study. What kind of study you are selecting, exploratory, explanatory or evaluative. I have already explained these things, that what kind of a nature of a study you are adopting, and similarly it will affect your sample selection. Availability of sampling frame, another important aspect. What is your sampling frame? Because on the basis of your sampling frame you are going to select your sample. So be sure that whatever sampling frame you are selecting for your study, is it available. Resources and logistic, very practical and very useful aspect for sample selection, because whenever you are going to select some certain sample, you need some resource in terms of finance, in terms of other aspects, and logistic supports also. So you see that whatever sample you are selecting, the resources and logistics are supporting you or not. If it is supporting, go for that sample. Not supporting, then make desirable changes into the sample. Ethical consideration, we have discussed it, that you have to see about the consensus and different kinds of aspect related to sample which you are going to select in your study. Target audience, here it is important to understand that whenever you are going to select a sample, you will have a nearby related sample also which will be contained within the population. So you have to identify and make sure that you are reaching and going to that sample which you have targeted for your research. Let us discuss with the help of one example. A study based on the travel students' learning experience in Chhattisgarh must consider and understand geographical access and cultural sensitivity. Here it's very important to understand, and it's very practical thing that you have to learn by your experience also. Whenever you are doing some certain kind of research, you have to understand the background of the research also. For example, when you are going into the travel areas of Chhattisgarh, then you have to understand that what will be the geographical access to you, whether you can go there, if you will go, how you will go. Cultural sensitivity, whether you will be able to adopt with the culture, whether you will be able to cope up with the culture, what will be available there. Because if you are going to collect data from some certain group, then definitely you have to respect their norms also, you have to respect their accommodations also, you have to respect their cultural sensitivities, and on the basis of that you have to define your sample, that yes, I'm going to do and select this certain sample, and I have already understand the geographical access as well as cultural sensitivity and other related aspects to the sample. Now have a comparison between qualitative and quantitative sampling needs. This is very important, because when you are having a different kinds of a study, if you have a different nature of your studies, then this sampling techniques and the samples and the methods that you adopt are bit different. So you can see here one by one. First is, let us discuss this on some certain aspect, that is goal. What will be the goal of quantitative research? You can see here on the screen, it basically focuses on generalizability. want to generalize something. Qualitative. Qualitative research basically focuses on depth of understanding, that how I can go more closer to the subject, how I can go more deeper into the aspects. And that is why you see the sample size is less in quantitative and qualitative, as it is very important for a researcher to understand that when you are going for a qualitative research, generally you have less number of samples, and next is sampling. Quantitative research, generally we prefer probability kind of a sampling, and in qualitative research we prefer purposive, snowball, or you can say non-probability sampling. Sample size, just now I have discussed. In quantitative research, sample size are generally larger than qualitative research, because it focuses on generalizability, it focuses on generalizing the aspects, whereas qualitative research sample size is smaller and saturation based. Example, let us see some example here. For a quantitative study, survey on college dropout rates, it's a kind of a quantitative study. Qualitative, in-depth interview with dropout students. When you go to conduct some certain interview with a student, those who have already dropped out, you are going more closer to their thought, you are going more closer to their aspects in a one-to-one manner. So this is the basic difference between quantitative and qualitative sampling requirements. Let us see some more examples from educational researches. Let us take example of quantitative research. Sampling 300 secondary students across government and private schools to assess math anxiety. It's a kind of a quantitative research. Qualitative research, selecting 15 government school teachers for a case study on ICT integration in rural classroom. You can clearly see the difference in both the kind of a sampling, that when we are taking a quantitative study, our sample size is 300, and on the other hand, when we are taking qualitative study, our sample size is 15. And in both the cases, we are going to do some certain kinds of analysis. In the first case, we are going to assess math anxiety, and in the second case, we are going to do and assess integration, ICT integration in rural classroom with the help of case study. So this is how we differentiate fundamental aspects of quantitative and qualitative samplings. Some major mistakes to avoid during sampling. This is very important, and you can make a note of this, that whenever you are defining sampling in your research proposal, please look into this aspect, because violating these aspects will make your sampling vague. So let us discuss this. First is sampling bias. Any kind of a sampling bias is dangerous for your research. Any kind of sampling bias is dangerous for your research. Inadequate sample size. In many researches, you see they have taken research sample with respect to demand of the study. It is not that you are taking so large sample, so your study will be always worthy, or if you are taking less sample, your study will not be fruitful. It's not like that. It depends upon the requirement, it depends upon the need, that what is your intent toward the research, what you are actually trying to do in a research, that is most important. And on the basis of that, you are going to select adequate sample size. Using the wrong sampling method, this is another very important aspect that you have to take into consideration while you define your sample. When you are using wrong sampling method, definitely you are going to select an inadequate sample, and when your sample is not proper, definitely you are going to come up with wrong aspects, wrong findings. So it is very important for a researcher to understand that whatever you have done in the form of introduction, rationale, research objective, hypothesis, research design, you have to execute all this over sample. So it is very important that you select your sample very judiciously. poorly defined target population. This is another a mistake that you have to avoid. When you are not able to define your population properly, then surely if the population is wrongly selected, if the population is vaguely defined, then you are going to make mistakes while selecting your sample. You are going to make mistake while selecting your sample. Next is ignoring ethical consideration. Very important. When you are ignoring the some certain kinds of ethical consideration while selecting your sample. For example, you do not have consent with the sample, or you do not have the idea of that sample that whether you will be allowed to collect data or not. Because try to understand, when you select some certain sample, you are selecting sample definitely for collecting your data. You are going to administer your tool, you are going to administer your all aspects of research over that sample. So if sample is not willing and you are avoiding this ethical consideration, it may lead to the vague kind of outputs which will not be appropriate as a research finding. Next is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is very important and very common whenever you define your sample and conduct your sampling, because whatever you are thinking as a researcher, you are trying to achieve it with the help of your objective and moving towards sample. But as a researcher, it is your prime responsibility and duty that you have to look into the practical aspects, that whatever sample you are selecting, you do not make some overgeneralization over that, because the moment you make overgeneralization, it disturbs the overall structure of your research, because research has some limitation, research has some aspects which you cannot cover, and predicting and providing overgeneralization in such a manner can lead to the vague kind of findings and unappropriate discussions. Next is avoiding the practical constraint in reaching the sample. Very important. When you are going in the field, or when you are planning to go into the field, please make sure that you have studied and understood the practical constraint related to your sampling process. Because if you are missing the practical constraint like money constraint, sometimes geographical problem, sometimes cultural problem, sometimes some sociological problems are there, sometimes some societal issues are there which will restrict you to collect data from certain sample. It's not easy. Let us take one example here. For example, if you want to conduct research over opinion of the persons those who have committed crime and they are in the jail, so you have selected a sample that you are going to take the sample of those persons those who are committed some crime and they are in the jail, then definitely you are not going to reach the sample very easily. You have to take several permission from authorities, whether they will allow you or not, whether you will permissible to do go inside the system. So these are the things that a researcher has to understand before defining your sample. Otherwise, in a research proposal, you can simply write. See, it is very easy to write anything, but when you will go for achieving it, it may come up with some serious problems. And second aspect is that when you are defining these things in a research proposal, the person those who are expert in the research, they will identify that you have not defined it properly, because it will appear very difficult to do this kind of a sampling. So look into this practical constraint, because one single mistake in this sampling aspect can lead to serious problems in your research. Because try to understand, suppose you have selected a very good research design, you have defined a very good research objective, you have a very good research plan, but if you are not able to reach out to that particular sample which you are targeting, then what is the use of all these things? Ultimately, you are stuck somewhere that you cannot collect data, and without data you cannot move forward, you cannot interpret it with anything without data. Therefore it is very important, very important for a researcher to understand that practical constraints should not be avoided. And as a researcher, it shows your maturity, it shows your competency when you are countering all these practical constraints while reaching the sample. And last is selecting too small or underpowered sample size. This is also important, that sometimes a researcher select very less number of sample, and for this problem I am again suggesting you go for statistical measures that have been already discussed in the previous lecture, that how to select sample size. Do not go for any random sample size, that is basically represented by capital N in a research. Do not go for any random sample size based on your opinion or thought. You should have proper rationale as well as justification, and that justification should come from review of literature, that justification should come from different statistical measures, and it should be supported from various researches, that why you have selected only 100 sample out of 1000 population. You should have a clear cut rationale for this, otherwise selecting very small sample can lead to a very vague research, because you will not able to justify it. Because when you are trying to generalize something, maybe the case that you are trying to generalize something, it becomes very problematic, because generalization requires adequate number of samples and true representation of the population. Therefore please make sure that you are not selecting too small or underpowered sample size. Defining the sampling and sample in a research proposal. Let us understand this. It will help you while you define your sample and sampling in a research proposal. You should aim to explain the following subcomponents. First, what is your population? You can make a note of this also, that whenever you are defining your sampling and sample in a research proposal, make sure that you are countering these aspects. What is your population? Who will be included in the sample? How the participant will be selected, means what will be the sampling method? How many participants will be selected? Sample size, I am again reminding, then do not make or select inadequate sample size, because it is very important, especially in the quantitative researches where you are trying to generalize something. Make sure that your sample size is adequate. And last is, why is this approach appropriate? Why is this approach appropriate? If you counter all these aspects and prepare your sampling and sample components accordingly, then definitely you will have a systematic structure and systematic articulations of what you decided to do and collect sample in your research. Concluding discussions for today's lecture. Major takeaways: focus on the population and various aspects of the sample while writing about them in a research proposal. Your research proposal must document thoughtful decision about whom to include, how to include, and why they are included. Very important. As a researcher, make sure that whom to include means whom to select as a sample, how to include them, how to select them, what will be the sampling technique, what will be the measures you will adopt to include them into the sample, and sometime how you will convince them, because it is difficult also to convince every sample to be make a participant in your research. How you will convince, how you will prepare somebody to be a part of your research, and why they are included. Proper rationale and justification of why you selected some certain kind of a sample or sampling technique in your research. And third and last is, always verify and cross check your sampling preferences with your research objective and design. And the third one, I would say, It's a very important thing that you should consider while defining your sample and sampling technique. Check it, cross check it. Whenever you define your sampling technique or sample, when you are trying to define your sample, cross check with your research objective and design, because certain kind of a research design does not allow some certain kind of a sampling technique. You have to look into that. For example, when you are doing a experimental research, when you are adopting a experimental design, quasi experimental design, you are not permitted to select a purposive kind of a sample. You are not allowed to do that. So these are the things. When you are doing these things, please cross check and see that your sampling preferences align with your research objective as well as design. So I hope you have understand that how to define your sample and identify and prepare and put it in your research proposal. So this is all from this lecture. Thank you so much.